who we were, and who we're destined to become are all reflections of the stories we tell, of gods and devils from tales of the heart to those of fear and foreboding. Stories shape us in the world we live in. Myths, folk tales, and even religious parables all define our cultures and beliefs. In each episode of Faith and Fear, we will dip our toes into the comparative narratives spanning the globe, considering the concepts and archetypes common to us all. Enle Shalom and Prazir. Hello and peace. It's a pleasure. Thanks for following me down the rabbit hole once again on my journey to better understand the stories and beliefs that shape us. Welcome back. I've missed you. I apologize for the unplanned hiatus and have returned to bring you more narrative comparisons of some of the world's most interesting and long-lived archetypal concepts. As our first week together again, we'll be discussing something a bit more lighthearted. I'm talking about seasons. And I'm lost behind the words I'll never find. And I'm left behind as the seasons roll on by. Chris Cornell, Seasons. Seasons change. They come and go. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we are quickly making our way out of the spring and into the summer months. We've gone from bitter cold to birds chirping, plants blooming, and now exhausting heat, all but consuming. It's the endless dance between dark and light, death followed by new birth, nature at its finest. This is what it means for the seasons to change. It represents the cycle of life for all things. Scientifically speaking, we know now that the seasons change because the Earth exists on a tilted axis. As the year progresses, different parts of the planet receive the direct rays of sun, causing warmer temperatures and the like. Summer takes place when a hemisphere, the northern or southern half of the planet, tilts towards the sun. Winter when it tilts away, receiving more or less direct sunlight. At least this is the most simple explanation. Of course, as with most things, different cultures have their own understanding as to why these shifts in temperature and weather occur. There are several mythological stories centered around the birth and passings of the seasons. Tonight, I have selected just a few from different beliefs from around the world to shine a little light on this global change. The story of the Greek goddess Demeter, her daughter Persephone, and the Greek god of the underworld Hades is probably one of the more well-known myths about the seasons. Persephone, daughter of Zeus and Demeter, caught the eye of Hades, who immediately decided to make her his bride. Finding the young goddess relaxing alone in a flowery meadow, Hades abducted her, stealing her away in his chariot before returning to the underworld. The two quickly wed, and Hades had every intention of Persephone remaining there with him, as his beautiful, albeit unwilling bride. However, Demeter was devastated without her daughter, becoming only more enraged at the knowledge of Zeus aiding in her kidnapping. Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, the harvest, and fertility of the earth. Her pain became the earth's pain, demanding that as long as Persephone remained in the underworld, no plants would grow. This meant that no crops would yield any food, so a famine quickly ensued. Zeus, realizing he had to intervene, finally demanded Persephone be released. However, the story goes that at this point, it had become too late. Persephone had already eaten food of the underworld, consuming only a small number of pomegranate seeds. Despite this, a compromise was made. Persephone would spend half the year in the land of the living with her mother, and the other half in the underworld with her husband. Whenever Persephone takes up her place as queen, her mother mourns her loss, allowing crops to die and winter to descend upon the land. As soon as she returns, the seasons of rebirth and new life begin again, animals and plant life sprouting anew. Oddly enough, I think it's worth noting that while their relationship began with a problematic start, for the most part stories describe Hades and Persephone as having a successful, happy marriage, both in love with the other. There's a Cherokee story about why the trees lose their leaves. As the legend goes, in the beginning, the plants and animals were all able to communicate, just as humans do. Balance and harmony persevered. The birds flew south during the winter months, just as they do now, seeking warmth and shelter. Unfortunately, one year Sparrow was injured and unable to make the journey. He sent his family ahead, not wanting to hold them back, and seeking a place to rest on his own, he came across an oak tree. He asked the great oak for help, but the oak refused to grant Sparrow shelter, so the bird continued traveling. Sparrow received the same response from the maple tree and many others, one after another, until finally he came to the pine. The other trees didn't care much for pine, whose branches were filled with needles instead of typical leaves. But pine, unlike all of the other trees, welcomed Sparrow with open branches, and Sparrow politely accepted. Thanks to the pine tree, Sparrow was able to take shelter during the winter, fully recovering, welcoming his family with perfect health when they finally returned home. The great creator, who continuously watched over everything, saw what had taken place, so a grand meeting including every animal and every plant was called. The creator was disappointed in the trees that had turned Sparrow away, so as punishment, their leaves were cursed to wither and die during all future winters as a punishment for their refusal to shelter an animal in need during those same months. The pine, who showed compassion despite his lack of leaves to share, was allowed to remain green all year around. In a tale somewhat similar to the story of Hades and Persephone, the story of the Blue Corn Maiden tells of the Hopi origin of spring. The beautiful Blue Corn Maiden was loved by all, and the fact that she delivered the most delicious blue corn to people all year round only added to her popularity. One year, as the winter months began to come in, the Blue Corn Maiden was visited by the winter Katsina, their personification of winter itself, as she was collecting firewood. He immediately became ensnared by her beauty. Falling in love, he asked her to be his bride. Unable to refuse his offer, the Blue Corn Maiden became more so his prisoner than his wife. Trapped inside the winter Katsina's home by snow he made to block every window and door. Despite this, the Blue Corn Maiden, through her own resilience, managed to dig herself free during a day the winter Katsina happened to be away. She was somehow able to find all she needed to build a fire, and in doing so, was able to produce enough warmth to melt the snow surrounding her. This allowed the summer Katsina to discover her location and intervene, rescuing her from the grasp of winter. When the winter Katsina discovered that the Blue Corn Maiden had been taken, he sought to take her back by force. However, the Katsinas agreed to a compromise. The Blue Corn Maiden would be forced to remain with the Winter Kasana for half of the year, while being allowed to spend the other half with the Summer Kasana. This meant that during the winter, the people would be without corn, yet thankfully it would return again in the summer. Due to this, the Blue Corn Maiden became the symbol of spring. The unmatched beauty of Amaterasu, the goddess of sun and light from Japanese Shinto, captivated the hearts of many with her skills at weaving and power over the movements of the sun. This popularity also drew the jealousy and ire of her brother Susanoo, the god who ruled over storms. Susanoo, envious of his sister's popularity and probably in need of anger management, had a bit of a tantrum, decimating Amaterasu's rice fields and killing a horse, an animal considered sacred to his sister. He tossed the horse's mutilated body at one of her looms, destroying all of her fabrics and weaving materials. His rampage even resulted in the death of one of Amaterasu's attendants. Distraught, she sealed herself up in a mountain cave, which also caused the sun to vanish and the crops to eventually wither and die. Everyone tried and failed to draw her out, but it was only the intervention of Uzume, the goddess of laughter, that seemed to have any success. Uzume placed a beautiful necklace on a tree as a lure, one that glittered in the moonlight. She then danced about, removing her clothing as she performed, causing the gods nearby to laugh and cheer. This commotion caught the attention of Amaterasu, who, after stealing a look from the safety of her cave, was bewitched by the allure of the necklace. This succeeded in finally drawing her out. Once she finally left the cave, the entrance was blocked to hinder any attempt at her returning and sealing herself away again. Finally, the sun was able to return. It is this story and the interactions between Amaterasu and her brother Susanoo that not only gave birth to the seasons, but also the endless dance between night and day. Among Neo-Pagan and Celtic lore exists the legend of the Holly and Oak Kings, and their ongoing battle with one another. This pair, often considered brothers, continuously challenged one another for dominion as the wheel of the year turns. During the winter solstice, the Oak King becomes victorious and rules until midsummer, when his power begins to wane. When the summer solstice takes place, it is the Holly King who overtakes the Oak King, ruling until midwinter, when his power starts to weaken in turn. Different traditions have the specifics of this conflict vary to some degree, the battles taking place on the equinoxes, but in each story it is always a delicate turning balance between the pair. In Norse mythology, Baldur is known as the beloved son of Odin and Frigga, revered as the god of light. Virtually everyone loved Baldur, who was not only considered very handsome, but compassionate and charming as well. Much like with Amaterasu, Baldur attracted the envy of one of his siblings, none other than the trickster god Loki. But Loki wasn't stupid. He knew he couldn't harm Baldur directly. Odin would not allow that. Loki was many things, but he wasn't dumb enough to incite his father's wrath. Still, Loki's scheming against his brother caused Frigga to have a premonition, a nightmare about the death of her son. In response, as a revered nature goddess, powerful in her own right, Frigga traveled the world, obtaining an oath from every living and non-living thing that none would ever harm Baldur. Everything but the simple mistletoe, which was considered young at the time and likely not a threat, finally abating her fear. However, Loki had eyes and ears everywhere and was a master at taking advantage of any situation, let alone weakness. Aware of his brother's single vulnerability, Loki used a celebratory gathering of the other gods to his favor. Everyone was having fun with Baldur's alleged invincibility, throwing all manner of objects at him, which only bounced off, having no effect. Loki tricked their other brother, the blind god of darkness Hoder, into joining in, handing him what was essentially a dart, but one made of mistletoe, even helping him with his aim. What was supposed to be a bit of harmless fun resulted in the dart piercing Baldur's heart, killing him almost instantly. Hoder was immediately blamed and slain by the god Vali. Frigga, wrought with despair much like Demeter, caused cold weather to take hold and plants to wither and die until finally Odin intervened in an attempt to answer the prayers of starving people. The goddess of the underworld, Hel, with one L, agreed to a deal. She would release Baldur from the land of the dead, only if every living and non-living thing mourned for the deceased god of light. All did, except for one single giant, who in actuality was Loki in disguise, claiming that Baldur killed her husband as the reason for her refusal. The circumstances of the deal being unfulfilled, Hel refused to release the god of light. However, some stories say that he was granted permission to return for only a part of each year, just as Persephone was allowed to do. In some variations of the myth, Frigga demands the return of both sons, and each is allowed to return in tandem, the god of light bringing forth the summer months, and the god of darkness causing winter, each brother taking their turn in the world of the living. There are other versions with a clear Christian influence that say Baldur will only return after the events of Ragnarok, and most of the gods have died, but I will likely go more into this during a future episode. Final note, some stories tell that Loki was found out and finally imprisoned, this incident being one of many accusations against him. I find it interesting that these stories about the seasons often link the cold winter months with events of sadness and despair, while the summer months are filled with warmth and joy. I suppose it's not surprising, since winter meant a lack of food and resources, resulting in countless deaths, while the spring and summer meant at least a chance for survival, with new animals being born and the possibility for crops to grow. There are a number of other deities who govern nature, and several who embody the seasons specifically, but I'm going to save those for a later episode, as I feel this one has already gone on long enough this week. I hope those of you here in the north are able to enjoy this warming weather, and I hope all of you are safe and well wherever you are. Be well and be kind. For now, Assalamu alaikum and Namaste. Peace be with you until we meet again. Thanks for listening to me as I've nerded out about stories and beliefs. Join me next week as I journey down the rabbit hole once again by subscribing and listening wherever podcasts are available. Leave me a comment on iTunes. 5-star reviews are always great and help others find the podcast. Also, you can email me at faithandfearpodcast@gmail.com. And lastly, share with others you feel may enjoy or get something out of these conversations. Who knows, maybe then we'll be one step closer to glimpsing the true nature of faith and fear. Music courtesy of Pixabay.com.